The cool, recycled air of the data center aisle-cold wallets and blinking servers bit at my exposed skin. Fluorescent light hummed, a low, persistent thrum against the rhythmic whir of cooling fans. Rows of racks stretched before me, each bay a glowing, silent sentinel guarding digital secrets. I wasn't here for data. I was here for patterns, for the faint human residue left behind even in the most sterile environments. My gloved fingers traced a faint scuff mark on the polished concrete floor, barely visible to the untrained eye. A micro-abrasion that suggested specific footwear, a precise angle of impact. It was a detail I'd been asked to consult on, a minor piece in a larger, complex puzzle involving illicit digital currency and something far older. Stolen cultural heritage, albeit in a different context. The work was precise, solitary, and demanded an almost surgical focus. My phone vibrated, a jarring intrusion. I pulled off a glove, the sensation of cool air on my skin a momentary shock. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number, but the prefix suggested regional law enforcement. I answered, my voice steady, even. Seth here. Professor, a gruff voice began. This is Detective Miller. We have a situation. Blackwood Manor. You know the place? Blackwood Manor. The name conjured images of crumbling stone, ancient oaks, and a history steeped in the region's colonial past. It was less a manor and more a sprawling, fortified estate, a landmark known for its extensive archives and the reclusive historian who resided there. I confirmed, a flicker of professional curiosity igniting. What's happened? Dr. Alistair Finch. He was found him this morning. Appears to be a fall from the observatory tower. Foul play isn't suspected. Tragic accident, most likely. But given the prominence of the deceased and the unique nature of the estate, the chief wants a second opinion. A thorough one. Your kind of thorough. The detective's tone held a hint of skepticism, a subtle implication that my thoroughness often complicated things. I ignored it. My job wasn't to simplify, but to clarify. I'll be there as soon as possible, I stated, already mentally shifting gears. The sterile glow of the data center faded, replaced by the imagined shadows of Blackwood. The drive took longer than I anticipated. The estate was nestled deep within a thick expanse of ancient forest, accessible only by a winding, unpaved road that clawed its way up a steep incline. The observatory tower, a distinct cylindrical structure capped with a tarnished copper dome, rose prominently from the north wing, silhouetted against the bruised sky. A single patrol car and an unmarked SUV were parked near the grand oak-studded entrance. A uniformed officer stood guard, and the detective, a burly man with a perpetually furrowed brow, was waiting for me. Professor Seth, the detective greeted, extending a hand. His grip was firm, perfunctory. Thanks for coming out. Place gives me the creeps, frankly. Tell me what you have, I said, bypassing pleasantries. My gaze was already sweeping the scene, absorbing the overall tableau before diving into specifics. Body's still where it was found, the detective explained, gesturing towards a section of the overgrown formal gardens beneath the observatory tower. Initial assessment by the responding officer and the coroner's assistant suggests an accidental fall. Dr. Finch was known to work late, often up in that tower. Rough terrain here, poor lighting at night. Easy to lose your footing. I nodded, my eyes fixed on the distant figure lying prone amidst the tangled rose bushes and damp earth. Even from this distance, I could discern the unnatural angle of the limbs, the stillness that spoke of finality. Any witnesses? I asked, already knowing the answer. None. The estate is isolated. Finch lived alone, had minimal staff who come in only during the day. The forensic photographer, a lean woman with an unreadable expression, had already completed her preliminary shots. A coroner's assistant knelt beside the deceased, preparing for transport. I stopped a few paces away, allowing my senses to acclimate. Alistair Finch lay face down, his body a crumpled form in a tweed jacket and trousers. My gaze traveled from the shattered telescope lens glittering like a handful of spilled diamonds near his head to the undisturbed ground around the impact site. The earth was soft here, loamy, but the disturbed area was surprisingly contained. A few broken branches, some crushed petals. I knelt, my forensic kit already open beside me. The detective stood back, arms crossed, watching with a mixture of impatience and professional courtesy. My eyes moved over the clothing, noting the fine weave of the tweed, the leather patches on the elbows, the worn but expensive brogues on his feet. The doctor's hands were bare, the fingers slightly splayed, palms down. Then I saw it. It wasn't organic. It wasn't wood or stone or a fragment of the telescope. It was too uniform too. Perfect. I carefully extracted it with tweezers. Under the dimming light, I could make out a faint, almost imperceptible sheen, and a tiny, angular glyph etched into its surface. The material felt cool, almost unnaturally so between my gloved fingers. This was not a fragment from an antique telescope. It was not a piece of the manor's crumbling stone. It was entirely out of place. Finch's historical pursuits, and most certainly from a simple, tragic fall. An accidental fall wouldn't place such an object in the deceased's grasp, especially not one so deliberately crafted. My mind raced, connecting the dots that weren't supposed to exist. The pristine, almost technological precision of the shard contrasted sharply with the rustic decay of Blackwood Manor. The detective's initial assessment of an accident suddenly felt flimsy, a thin veil over something far more intricate. Alistair Finch hadn't simply fallen. My path forward was clear, and it was going to be anything but simple. I stopped, my gaze sweeping over the scene. The historian, Dr. Finch, lay sprawled at the base of a crumbling stone balustrade, his body a stark silhouette against the damp earth. The early morning mist still clung to the ancient yew trees, muffling the distant sounds of the estate, lending an eerie stillness to the grim tableau. The coroner's assistant, a stout man with meticulous gloves, glanced up at me, a silent acknowledgement of my arrival. Professor Seth, the lead detective, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, greeted me. "Glad you're here. Appears to be a tragic accident. Dr. Finch lost his footing." I offered a curt nod, my eyes already dissecting the scene. The official narrative was straightforward, almost too neat. A prominent historian, known for his reclusive habits and vast knowledge of forgotten eras, slips on wet stone, falls, and dies. But my experience had taught me that the simplest explanations were often cloaks for the most intricate deceptions. I knelt, my kit bag settling beside me with a soft thud. "I'll need some space," I informed the coroner's assistant, who was preparing to bag the hands. He nodded, carefully retracting, allowing me unobstructed access. The forensic photographer, silent as ever, continued to document, her camera's soft clicks punctuating the quiet. My first impression of Dr. Finch's remains was of an elderly man, frail, but not entirely decrepit. His tweed jacket was torn at the shoulder, a dark stain blossoming on the lapel. The angle of his body, the impact points visible on the ground, seemed consistent with a fall. But consistency was a starting point, not a conclusion. I pulled on my own nitrile gloves, then retrieved my magnifying visor, its twin LED lights illuminating the scene with clinical precision. I began with the cranium, tracing the hairline fractures radiating from the occipital region. Consistent with impact, yes. But then I moved to the ribs. My fingers, practiced and sensitive, probed beneath the torn fabric. A sharp intake of breath escaped me. Not just one, but several, fractured. And not simple breaks. These were oblique fractures, almost spiral in nature, indicative of a twisting force, not merely blunt impact from a straight fall. A fall down a relatively short distance onto soft earth shouldn't produce this specific pattern. This wasn't a casual stumble. This was something else. A struggle, perhaps? My jaw tightened. Next, I focused on the clothing. Finch's trousers, especially around the cuffs and knees, bore faint smudges of what appeared to be dust. I used my fine-tipped forceps to collect a few strands of fabric, carefully placing them into a sterile evidence bag. The dust itself was unusual, not the typical earthy grime of the estate grounds. Under my magnifier, it gleamed with a peculiar iridescence, almost metallic, yet organic in its irregularity. It was a pale, almost silvery gray, unlike any soil or mineral I recognized from the geological surveys of this region. This estate was built on limestone and clay, yet this dust suggested something entirely different. A unique mineral, perhaps. Not native. I stood slowly, my knees protesting the cold. My gaze met the lead detective's. Her expression remained unreadable, but I saw a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. "These fractures," I stated, my voice low, "they suggest more than a simple fall. And I found some trace evidence on the victim's clothing that warrants immediate lab analysis. It's a mineral dust, unlike anything found in this area." The detective's eyebrows raised fractionally. Meaning? I replied, allowing a hint of steel to enter my tone. Dr. Finch didn't just trip. The coroner's assistant exchanged a quick glance with the detective. The atmosphere shifted, the easy acceptance of an accident giving way to a nascent suspicion. I knew my words had landed. The official narrative was now irrevocably compromised. Later that evening, after the remains had been transported and the preliminary reports filed, the unusual mineral dust gnawed at me. My initial research, cross-referencing geological databases, yielded no match for the region. My mind, a labyrinth of data and hypotheses, began to connect the dots. Finch's lifework was ancient artifacts, forgotten legacies. Could this dust be a clue to the provenance of something illicit? The trail, I deduced, would not be found in dusty archives or forgotten tombs, but in the sterile, silent heart of modern information. I found myself driving through the pre-dawn gloom, the city lights a blur, towards an address I'd extracted from Dr. Finch's encrypted personal device. A device I'd discreetly pocketed earlier, its contents hinting at digital footprints far removed from the manor's pastoral setting. The address led me to an unassuming industrial park on the outskirts of the city. I bypassed the main entrance, finding a service access point that, with a little finesse and a bypass tool, granted me entry. The air inside was cool, dry, and hummed with a low, persistent thrum. The sheer scale was breathtaking. Rows upon rows of towering racks stretched into the distance, each one a monument to processed information. Thousands of tiny green and amber lights pulsed in rhythmic synchronicity, a silent chorus of data flow. The cold air, blasted from vents in the floor, bit at my exposed skin. This wasn't just a storage facility. It was a vault, a hidden repository for secrets far more valuable than mere currency. I located the specific rack number I'd decrypted from Dr. Finch's device. It was an older model, discreetly tucked away amidst the newer, flashier units. My fingers moved with practiced ease over the keypad, entering a sequence known only to Dr. Finch, now to me. A soft click echoed in the aisle, almost imperceptible over the server hum. And behind them, a discreet, almost invisible compartment. Inside, I found a single, tarnished silver locket and a micro SD card. But it was the SD card that held my attention. This was where Dr. Finch had hidden his most sensitive data, undoubtedly the key to understanding the mineral dust, the peculiar fractures, and the true nature of his demise. The following morning, the air in the forensic lab was thick with the scent of ozone and antiseptic. Fluorescent lights hummed, casting a sterile glow on the analytical instruments. I leaned over the oculars of a scanning electron microscope. My breath held as the high-resolution image of the mineral dust filled my field of vision. Each particle, once an innocuous speck, now loomed like a jagged mountain range, its crystalline structure unique. Trace element analysis confirms a high concentration of an unusual silicate. The lab technician, a meticulous woman named Eleanor, stated, her voice quiet but precise. She tapped a series of keys on a nearby workstation, and a spectral graph bloomed on the screen. It's consistent with deposits found only in a handful of remote, geologically active zones. The Carpathian foothills. That was a known, albeit under-researched region of archaeological significance. Dr. Finch had spent years studying forgotten cultures. Could this mineral dust be a geographic marker, a breadcrumb leading me to his final, most dangerous obsession? I spent the next several hours sifting through Dr. Finch's digital archives, granted access through a formal warrant. His published works were meticulous, but it was the peripheral data that captured my attention. Encrypted files, cross-referenced with geological survey maps, marked with obscure alphanumeric codes. One particular set of coordinates, repeatedly accessed and cross-referenced with the mineral composition Eleanor had identified, stood out. It pointed to a heavily forested, privately owned tract of land, miles from any established road, deep within the foothills. The land was not registered as an official archaeological site. It was unsanctioned. Illicit. My gut tightened. This was it. This was the source of the dust, the place where Finch had been before his death. I reached out to a colleague in the Historical Preservation Department, a man with an encyclopedic knowledge of regional academic circles. He confirmed that Dr. Finch had recently fallen out with his research assistant, a young academic named Marcus, over what was described as unethical research practices. Marcus had abruptly resigned weeks before Finch's death, vanishing from public academic life. A quick search of university payroll records gave me a current contact. I found Marcus working a night shift at a secure facility, a sprawling concrete edifice that hummed with a low, constant thrum. Inside, the air was cold and dry, smelling faintly of clean metal. Marcus sat hunched over a console, his face illuminated by the pale blue glow of a monitor, looking utterly drained. His eyes, when he finally looked up, were wide with a mixture of suspicion and profound exhaustion. "Seth," I introduced myself, extending a hand. "We need to talk about Dr. Finch." He flinched, pulling his hand back as if burned. I told the detective everything I know. It was an accident, a tragic fall. His voice was thin, strained. The dust on his clothing, Marcus. It's a unique mineral. It points to a specific remote location, a place where Finch was conducting unsanctioned work. You know about it, don't you? I kept my voice level, but firm. I watched his eyes dart around the sterile aisle as if searching for an escape route, or perhaps for listening ears. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He changed. After he found the first fragments, he stopped trusting anyone, especially me. Fragments of what? I pressed, leaning in closer. The hum of the machinery was a tangible presence, a low electronic growl. He called it the lost artifact, said it would rewrite history. Something about a forgotten civilization, a legacy buried under centuries of deliberate obfuscation. Marcus's voice was barely audible over the whirring fans. He became convinced it was tied to the estate itself, that the family had been guarding its secret for generations. That's why he was so keen on that specific dig site, the one he never spoke about publicly. "And the meetings?" I asked, recalling my colleague's casual mention of Finch's increasingly secretive behavior. Who was he meeting with? Marcus tensed, his shoulders hunching. He rubbed his temples, his face etched with a fear that went beyond professional discomfort. Enigmatic figures. Always at night. Always away from the university. They weren't academics. They spoke in hushed tones. I only saw them from a distance, but they looked imposing. Not the kind of people you argue with. He shuddered. He became reckless, Seth. He started taking risks. He thought he was close to something monumental, something that would cement his legacy forever. But I saw the danger. I tried to warn him. "What kind of danger?" I asked, my gaze unwavering. The cold air in the data center seemed to intensify, raising goosebumps on my arms. He wouldn't say, just that they wouldn't let him publish, that they wanted it for themselves, the artifact, the legacy. He said it was too valuable, too dangerous, to ever see the light of day. That's why I left. I couldn't be a part of it anymore. He looked away, his voice barely a breath. I think he found it, Seth. Finch hadn't just stumbled and fallen. He had unearthed a secret so profound, so coveted, that it had cost him his life. The implication was a lead weight in my gut. Someone had gone to great lengths to prevent whatever he'd found from seeing the light of day. And now I was the one holding the flickering torch. I needed to see the dig site. The official police report had glossed over the excavation, dismissing it as a hobby, a side project. But Finch, I knew, didn't have side projects. His work was his life. The air here was damp, heavy with the scent of pine and freshly turned earth. A yellow police tape, slack and frayed, marked the perimeter. It looked more like an afterthought than a serious barrier. I ducked under it, the plastic scraping against my jacket. The site itself was a shallow trench, perhaps 10 feet long and half as wide, dug into a gentle slope. Tools lay scattered. A trowel half buried in loose soil, a brush with bristles caked in mud, a sifting screen propped against a canvas tarp. The scene was too haphazard, too abandoned. Finch was meticulous, almost obsessively so. He would never have left his work like this. I knelt, running my gloved fingers over a section near the trench's edge. The earth here felt looser than the surrounding compact soil, as if someone had hastily backfilled a section. My eyes scanned the ground, searching for anything out of place. Near a cluster of exposed roots, half hidden beneath a scattering of pine needles, something caught the light. It was small, no larger than my thumb, a curved shard of fired clay. The surface was rough, unglazed, with a distinct, almost geometric pattern etched into its exterior. I carefully picked it up, turning it over in my palm. The color was a deep, earthy red, unlike anything I'd seen in the local archaeological records. This wasn't colonial pottery. It looked older, far older, and the style was entirely anachronistic for this region. My breath hitched. This was precisely the kind of detail Finch would have obsessed over, the kind of detail that could rewrite history. And it was buried here, not in a museum or a curated collection. A vehicle's engine rumbled, growing louder, and a police cruiser crunched to a halt on the dirt track above. A local officer, a man with a stern jaw and a badge glinting on his chest, stepped out. "Still at it, Seth?" he asked, his voice tight. "We're wrapping this up. Official ruling stands. Accidental fall." "With respect, officer, Finch was a scholar, not a clumsy tourist," I replied, holding up the pottery shard. "And this isn't exactly local fauna. This suggests deeper activity here, recent activity, that doesn't align with an accidental death." The officer's eyes narrowed, flickering from the shard to my face. "My orders are clear. Case closed. We've got resources stretched thin as it is. We can't keep a site like this open indefinitely for speculation." The unspoken message hung heavy in the air. "Stop digging." The pressure on him was palpable, a tangible weight I could almost see. It wasn't just bureaucracy, it was an active discouragement. I knew then that my initial suspicions were correct. Someone with influence wanted this case buried. "I understand your position," I said, carefully placing the shard into a small evidence bag. "But my investigation continues." I met his gaze, unflinching. He held it for a moment, then sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Just be careful, Seth," he warned, his voice dropping slightly. "This isn't a simple fall. Things around here, they get complicated." It was the closest thing to an admission he would give. I left the dig site, the pottery shard secured, the officer's warning echoing in my ears. The resistance I faced only hardened my resolve. If they wanted me to stop, it meant I was getting closer. Back at my forensic lab, the familiar hum of the air filtration system usually offered a sense of calm. Tonight, it felt like a prelude. The outer lock on the heavy steel door was jimmied, a clean, professional job. My stomach tightened. I pushed the door open, my hand instinctively going for the switch. The lights flickered on, revealing a scene that was both unsettling and strangely precise. Drawers in my specimen cabinets were pulled out, their contents rummaged through, but nothing was missing. My microscope was untouched. They hadn't wanted my equipment, nor my samples. They had wanted to know what I knew, or, more accurately, to send a message. I walked through the lab, every sense on high alert. The only thing they'd disturbed was my personal desk calendar, flipped open to the current week, a small red circle drawn around the day Finch had died. The air in the lab, usually sterile, felt charged with an invisible threat. This wasn't a random burglary. This was a targeted warning, sharp and undeniable. My hands clenched. Finch's secret, whatever it was, had a formidable guardian. And now, that guardian had turned its attention to me. The officer's eyes narrowed, flickering from the shard to my face. My orders are clear. Case closed. We've got resources stretched thin as it is. Speculation. The unspoken message hung heavy in the air. Stop digging? I felt the familiar heat rise in my chest, a stubborn ember igniting. Speculation? This wasn't guesswork. It was a minute, tangible anomaly. The pressure on him was palpable, a thick, invisible shroud draped over the entire investigation. But that pressure, I realized, wasn't just about strained resources. It was about something else entirely, something he'd been told to ignore, or perhaps to conceal. Understood, I said, my voice level, betraying none of the frustration coiling in my gut. I pocketed the fragment, the rough edge pressing into my palm like a silent promise. There was no point arguing here, not now. The scene was effectively shut down. My official access was revoked. But my curiosity, my forensic instinct, wasn't. I spent the next few hours in a blur of packing and formal goodbyes, shaking hands with the estate's caretaker, offering polite condolences to the family's representative, a stern-faced legal proxy. My mind, however, was already elsewhere, replaying the details of the fall, the position of the body, the subtle discrepancies that had first caught my attention. The shard was the latest, most insistent whisper of something profoundly wrong. Back in my own personal lab, a small, unassuming space tucked away in a converted warehouse on the city's periphery, the true work began. I powered on the microscope, the spectral analyzer, the array of instruments that were my real partners in discovery. The air hummed with their low thrum. I placed the pottery fragment carefully under the lens, adjusting the focus until the intricate surface filled the screen. Under high magnification, the shard revealed its secrets. The clay matrix was finely levigated, almost impossibly so for something supposedly ancient. The firing temperature, deduced from the crystalline structure of the vitrified silica, was remarkably precise, indicative of a controlled kiln environment far beyond the capabilities of the civilization it purported to represent. I ran a spectrographic analysis on the pigment, a vibrant cobalt blue that, to the naked eye, appeared perfectly aged. The results flashed on the screen. A modern synthetic binder, expertly mixed with mineral pigments to mimic natural degradation over millennia. This wasn't just a fake. This was a masterpiece of deception, designed with an almost obsessive attention to detail. It was a forensic ghost, meticulously crafted to pass as an artifact from the specific, obscure civilization that Finch had been so deeply immersed in. The level of sophistication, the scientific precision in its creation was staggering. Finch wasn't just a historian researching ancient artifacts. He was exposing a high-stakes forgery ring. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The officer's abrupt dismissal, the pressure to close the case, it all clicked into place. This wasn't about a tragic accident. This was about silencing someone who had stumbled onto a lucrative illicit enterprise. The implications were immense, stretching far beyond the dusty halls of academia. I wasn't looking for clues to a fall. I was looking for evidence of a conspiracy, for proof of his investigation. I knew the estate's security detail would be minimal now that the official investigation was closed. Under the cloak of pre-dawn darkness, I found myself back at the estate, the grand old house looming silent and imposing against the bruised sky. A single board security guard was visible, pacing the perimeter near the main gate. I knew the layout from my initial survey, and a less used service entrance around the back, partially obscured by overgrown ivy, offered an unmonitored path. A quick, practiced manipulation of the lock, and I was inside. Finch's study was exactly as I'd left it, a monument to scholarly chaos. The scent of old paper and leather hung heavy. My eyes scanned the overflowing bookshelves, the stacks of journals, the maps spread across the desk. I moved methodically, running my hands along the spines of books, tapping panels, listening. One of the panels felt ever so slightly loose. I pressed harder, feeling a faint click. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating its contents. There, nestled amongst dust and cobwebs, were two items. The first was a small, ruggedized solid-state drive, no bigger than my thumb, clearly designed for secure, encrypted storage. I pocketed it immediately. The second was a rolled-up piece of parchment, brittle with age, tied with a faded ribbon. I unrolled it carefully. It wasn't a traditional map of any known region. Instead, it was a grid of symbols and arcane markings, interspersed with precise coordinates and handwritten annotations in Finch's distinctive script. A cryptic, coded map. My heart hammered against my ribs, a dull thud in the quiet room. Finch hadn't just been researching, he'd been tracking something. The stakes had just skyrocketed. I was no longer investigating a death. I was unraveling a criminal enterprise, one that was clearly willing to kill to protect its secrets. I secured the compartment, carefully replacing the panel. I had to get this data, this map, somewhere secure. My mind immediately went to the most impenetrable digital fortress I knew. I drove through the city, the solid-state drive and the cryptic map heavy in my bag. Here, among the silent, unblinking eyes of 1,000 machines, Finch's final secrets would be safe. For now, while I worked to unlock them. The service entrance, barely more than a neglected wooden door tucked behind a dense thicket of overgrown rhododendrons, offered exactly the purchase I needed. The security guard, a hulking shadow against the mansion's facade, continued his monotonous circuit, his path predictable, his attention clearly elsewhere. I moved with a practiced fluidity, a ghost in the pre-dawn hush, the damp grass muffling my steps. The lock was a rudimentary affair, a simple pin tumbler, which yielded to my picks in less time than it took the guard to round the north corner of the estate. A soft click, a gentle push, and I was inside. The air within the service corridor was stale and cool, carrying the faint scent of old dust and something metallic, like aged wiring. I remembered the historian's study, the hidden panel behind the bookshelf, and the curious anomaly I'd noted during my initial search, a subtle, almost imperceptible hum that wasn't quite electrical interference, nor the creak of an old house settling. It had been too consistent, too precise. My path led me deeper into the mansion's forgotten core, beneath the grand reception rooms and the opulent libraries. The metallic scent grew stronger, the hum a low thrum against the soles of my boots. I found it eventually, not far from where the study's secret passage would have deposited me. A heavy, reinforced door, indistinguishable from the other utility access points save for the almost invisible biometric scanner beside the handle. This was no ordinary storage room. My internal forensic compass spun wildly. The scanner was cold, inactive. The historian must have had some other way in, or perhaps it was only active when he was present. I ran a gloved hand over the seams of the door, searching for a manual override, A forgotten keyhole, anything. My fingers snagged on a barely there indentation, a faint outline of what looked like a disguised keypad, now inert. I pulled out a small, specialized thermal imager. The residual heat signature was clear, recent use, and a distinct pattern of 4 key presses. Not a code, but a sequence. A quick mental comparison to the last 4 digits of the historian's birth year, a detail I'd noted from his personal effects, and I typed it in. The panel glowed green, and a soft pneumatic hiss accompanied the release of the heavy bolts. I pushed the door open, revealing a short, brightly lit corridor that ended abruptly in another equally fortified entrance. This one had a retinal scanner. My heart quickened. He hadn't just been a historian. He'd been guarding something intensely valuable, intensely secret. I knew I couldn't bypass this with my current tools, but the hum was deafening here, vibrating through the floor. It was coming from beyond this door. I scanned the walls, the ceiling, the floor. There had to be another way. My flashlight beam danced over an air vent, unusually large, positioned high on the wall near the ceiling. It was too small for me, but perhaps... I remembered the small, remotely operated inspection camera I carried. With a grunt, I leveraged a discarded crate to reach the vent. It was secured by 4 screws, easily removed with my multi-tool. I slipped the camera inside, its tiny LED illuminating the dusty shaft. The shaft opened into a larger space, and then a revelation. The camera's feed flickered to life on the small screen of my handheld device, revealing a cavernous, sterile chamber. The hum I'd been tracking was the collective sigh of 1,000 cooling fans. The camera, with a final, careful maneuver, showed me an access panel, slightly ajar, on the far side of the server room. It seemed the historian had a direct, less conspicuous route for his own use. I retrieved my camera, resecured the vent, and retraced my steps to a service elevator I'd spotted earlier, marked Basement Maintenance. It was a long shot, but if there was a maintenance access to this server room, it would likely be from the basement. My gamble paid off. The elevator descended with a groan, opening into a dimly lit, unfinished concrete corridor. At the very end, partially obscured by stacks of old ventilation ducts, was a door identical to the one I'd bypassed earlier, save for a simple keycard reader. A quick swipe of a master keycard I'd borrowed from the estate manager's office during my first visit, and the door clicked open. The air was crisp, almost painfully dry, charged with the static electricity of countless circuits. The blinking servers cast an eerie, almost hypnotic glow across the polished floor. I moved stealthily, my footsteps echoing faintly in the vast space. Finding the historian's workstation wasn't difficult. It was a dedicated console nestled between 2 server racks, a high-resolution display already awake, showing a complex, multi-layered map. The coded map. The map was indeed coded, overlaid with glyphs and symbols I recognized from ancient Mesopotamian texts, but adapted, hybridized. I worked through the initial encryption layer, a complex substitution cipher disguised as a historical linguistic puzzle. The historian had been clever, but not clever enough to stump a forensic anthropologist who specialized in ancient communication systems. Ours blurred into a single, focused effort. As the sun began its hesitant climb outside, filtering a pale, bruised light through the distant, reinforced windows of the facility, the map began to yield its secrets. Lines of connection solidified, revealing a vast network of wealthy collectors, their names, many of them prominent figures in art and finance, now appearing beside the cryptic symbols. These were not mere enthusiasts. These were orchestrators. Then I found the encrypted files, a deeper layer of protection, hinting at the sensitivity of their contents. This was where the real danger lay. I employed a multi-pronged attack, leveraging known vulnerabilities in obscure historical encryption algorithms, some of which dated back to early military ciphers, modified with modern obfuscation techniques. The data slowly, agonizingly began to unscramble. The first file title shimmered into readability. The Legacy, A custodian's mandate. My breath hitched. I clicked it open. The text was not a straightforward document. It was a manifesto, a creed. It spoke of preserving a particular historical narrative, of shaping public perception, of controlling access to truth. It detailed a long-standing organization, centuries old, dedicated to this singular purpose. Another file, even more heavily encrypted, finally opened, revealing a list of names under the heading, The Keepers, Council Members. These were not just collectors. They were the guardians, the manipulators. The document outlined their roles in acquiring, authenticating, and, crucially, selectively revealing or concealing artifacts. It wasn't about forgery, not entirely. It was about leveraging genuine, priceless artifacts to support a manufactured history, while burying anything that contradicted their chosen narrative. They weren't just trading artifacts. They were trading in history itself, controlling the flow of knowledge to preserve their legacy. My own field, the very foundation of my work, was being twisted, exploited, weaponized. The historian hadn't simply been a victim of a tragic fall. He had stumbled upon, or perhaps been part of, a conspiracy so vast, so deeply entrenched, that it transcended mere illicit trade. I stared at the blinking servers, the silent witnesses to a truth that could unravel the very fabric of accepted history. The neglected wooden door, a mere afterthought on the grand estate, had given me what I needed. I'd moved through the periphery of the mansion like a phantom, my senses sharpened by the chill of the night and the hum of unseen machinery. The initial reconnaissance had yielded more than I'd hoped. Fragments of unusual pottery, not merely anachronistic for the period of the alleged fall, but bearing a unique mineral residue that defied conventional geological markers. I'd bagged my samples, photographed the subtle disturbances, and retreated before the hulking shadow of the security guard completed his next monotonous circuit. Now, hours later, the air was sterile, charged with the low thrum of high-performance electronics. The frigid air, pumped through perforated tiles, carried the faint metallic scent of ozone and dust. Rows of indicator lights, a hypnotic pulse of green and amber reflected in the polished floor. My fingers danced across a borrowed keyboard, navigating encrypted academic databases, cross-referencing Dr. Finch's obscure publications with known archaeological expeditions. My initial forensic analysis of the mineral dust, performed with a portable spectrometer I'd brought, suggested a composition unlike anything documented in mainstream geological surveys. It was a signature, I was certain, of a specific, perhaps unique, geological formation. Thorne, a specialist in Near Eastern antiquities, had retired abruptly years ago, his academic career seemingly cut short despite his immense contributions. A quick search of public records showed a modest, reclusive life, far from the gilded halls of academia. He was the kind of loose end that snagged my investigative instincts. Locating Thorne's current address wasn't difficult for someone with my resources and a knack for digital archaeology. The challenge was approaching him without triggering a defensive reflex. I found him in a small, cluttered apartment on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where books where furniture and dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight. He answered the door with a wariness that spoke volumes, his eyes, magnified by thick lenses, holding a deep, ancient sorrow. "Mr. Thorne," I began, holding up my identification. "My name is Seth. I'm investigating the death of Dr. Finch." His thin lips pressed into a tighter line. "Finch is gone. A tragic accident, I heard. What more is there to investigate?" His voice was raspy, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. He made no move to invite me in. "There are inconsistencies," I pressed, keeping my tone level, non-threatening. "Anachronistic details, and a specific mineral dust found at the scene. I believe you might recognize its unique composition." I produced a sealed glassine envelope containing a microscopic sample of the fine, almost iridescent particulate. I held it up, letting the weak afternoon light catch its subtle shimmer. Thorne's gaze fixed on the envelope, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly. A tremor ran through his frail frame. That is impossible. Is it? I pushed, sensing a crack in his carefully constructed facade. Dr. Finch was pursuing something dangerous, wasn't he? Something beyond conventional academic study. He backed away from the door, a gesture of reluctant invitation. I stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and something faintly metallic like old coins. He didn't sit himself, instead pacing a tight circle amidst the clutter. You speak of things you cannot possibly comprehend. I comprehend forensic evidence, I countered, placing the envelope on a nearby table, letting its presence anchor the conversation. And the mineral dust I found is a marker, a signature. It points to a specific geological anomaly. An anomaly, I suspect, connected to the artifacts Dr. Finch was researching. He stopped pacing, his gaze piercing. Finch was a fool, brash, undisciplined. Finch stumbled upon one of those truths, didn't he? He finally sank into a chair, running a trembling hand over his face. They are not merely a society, Seth. They are an institution. Ancient, powerful, with tendrils reaching into every facet of the academic and financial worlds. They curate history, not just artifacts. They decide what is known and what remains buried. And the mineral dust? I pressed, bringing his back to the evidence. Where does it come from? Its unique signature isn't in any public database. It must be specific to a very particular location. Thorne hesitated, his eyes darting around his cluttered study as if seeking an escape. The weight of his secret was palpable. Finch, he had found a link to an estate, remote, untouched for centuries or so they claimed, a place where the earth itself holds secrets. He finally looked at me, a desperate plea in his gaze. A private estate, deep in the Appalachian foothills, owned by a family whose lineage dates back to the colonial era, but whose true wealth, whose true power, comes from what they guard. It's known only as Blackwood Manor. The name hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Blackwood Manor, a remote private estate. The unique mineral dust, now a direct link to a location, not just an anomaly. The pieces were beginning to align, forming a terrifying mosaic of ancient power and modern manipulation. The tension in the room coiled, tightening around me. Thorne's fear was contagious, but it only strengthened my resolve. I had a name, a place, and a confirmation of the conspiracy. The path ahead was clear and undeniably perilous. The gravel crunched under the tires of the rented vehicle as I navigated the winding, unlit road. Blackwood Manor. The estate sat nestled deep within a private preserve, miles from the nearest paved road, shrouded by ancient skeletal oaks. Moonlight, when it pierced the canopy, cast long, distorted shadows that danced like specters. I killed the engine a mile from the main gates, relying on instinct and a hastily acquired satellite image. The air was frigid, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. My gear pack felt heavy on my shoulders, loaded with lockout tools, a compact thermal imager, and a digital recorder. This wasn't a crime scene. It was an infiltration. Every step I took across the uneven terrain was deliberate, my boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. The perimeter fence, a formidable mesh of steel and sensors, was exactly where I expected it to be. The thermal imager showed no immediate patrols, but I knew better than to rely solely on that. Industrialists like Elias Thorne didn't skimp on security. I found a dead zone near a thick cluster of overgrown rhododendrons, a slight dip in the terrain that offered a blind spot. A quick snip, a careful bend, and I was through, my heart a steady drum against my ribs. But I wasn't interested in the main residence. My target was the ancillary structures, the less obvious places where illicit activities might be hidden. The rear of the estate held a complex of newer, more utilitarian buildings, cleverly designed to blend with the historic architecture but betraying their modern purpose with their uniform, windowless facades. The largest of these, set slightly apart, seemed the most promising. No external cameras, but a reinforced service door hinted at something valuable inside. The door swung inward with a faint hiss of well-maintained hydraulics, revealing a short, dark corridor. I slipped inside, closing the door silently behind me. The air immediately warmer, drier, smelling faintly of chemicals and fine grit. Behind it, the air thrummed with the low hum of machinery. This was it. I pushed the panel open, revealing a large, brightly lit space. The room was a state-of-the-art forgery workshop. Gleaming laser engravers sat alongside benches cluttered with antique tools, chisels, mallets, polishing wheels. Digital scanners captured intricate textures, while sophisticated 3D printers hummed, creating flawless replicas of ancient pottery shards. Chemical baths frothed gently, designed to accelerate the aging process, giving newly forged pieces the patina of millennia. The air was thick with the scent of solvents, pulverized stone, and ozone. The sheer scale and precision were breathtaking, a testament to Thorne's ambition and ruthlessness. This wasn't just hobbyist forgery. This was industrial-level deception. My recorder was already running, capturing the visual evidence. I moved quickly, documenting everything: the specific tools, the materials, the unfinished pieces. The mineral dust, the same unique composition I'd found on the historian's remains. Coated surfaces here, confirming the link. This was where the anachronisms had been born, where history was being rewritten, literally. A faint vibration in the floor drew my attention to a far wall. Another hidden door, this one heavier, more substantial. I examined the locking mechanism, a complex digital keypad flanked by biometric scanners. Too advanced for my lockout tools, but a loose panel on an adjacent utility conduit caught my eye. A quick pry, and I was looking at a tangle of fiber optics and power lines. A small, portable jammer from my pack disrupted the local network, buying me precious seconds. I bypassed the main circuit, a surge of power overriding the digital lock. The heavy vault door swung open with a deep, resonant groan. Inside, the air was cool and still, carrying the faint, earthy smell of antiquity. The vault was not filled with forgeries, but with genuine, priceless artifacts. Shelves lined the walls, laden with items that made my breath catch. Intricately carved jade burial masks from forgotten dynasties. Fragile scrolls penned in scripts I only recognized from textbooks. Gold and silver jewelry adorned with precious stones that glittered under my flashlight beam. Pottery fragments dating back thousands of years. These weren't replicas, they were originals, clearly plundered from archaeological sites across the globe. Each piece represented a stolen fragment of human history, ripped from its context, destined for the black market or Thorne's private collection. My recorder continued to whir, documenting this trove of illicit wealth. Then, a sudden jarring change. The low hum of the workshop machinery outside the vault abruptly intensified, shifting to a high-pitched whine. Perimeter breach confirmed. Security response initiated. My cover was blown. Thorne's advanced security systems had finally caught me. The jammer had bought me time, but not enough. I slammed the vault door shut, hoping to buy myself a few more moments, and scrambled back through the forgery workshop. The corridor leading to the service door was now bathed in a pulsing red light. Footsteps echoed from the far end, heavy and fast. I veered left, away from the approaching figures, plunging into a narrower, less used service passage. This was the nerve center, the brain of Thorne's operation, where his illicit finances were undoubtedly managed and secured. The metallic tang of ozone was sharp in my nostrils. I squeezed between two rows of humming equipment, the narrow space barely accommodating my frame. I could hear the security personnel calling out, their voices muffled by the server noise, but getting closer. I pressed myself against a cold metal rack, trying to regulate my breathing, every instinct screaming at me to move, to run. My hand gripped the heavy-duty wire cutters in my pack, a desperate last resort. My lungs burned, each gasp tearing at my throat. Thorne's advanced security wasn't just about cameras. I could feel the subtle shift in air pressure, the faint thrumming beneath my feet, indicating motion sensors had activated. I slammed the vault door shut, the heavy steel echoing like a death knell, and scrambled back through the forgery workshop. The corridor leading to the service door was now bathed in a harsh, pulsing red light. A warning. I didn't stop to think, only to react. A heavy antique cabinet stood near the service entrance. With a desperate heave, I pushed it, sending it toppling against the door with a splintering crash. It wouldn't hold for long, but it would buy me seconds. Footsteps, heavy and urgent, thumped from the direction of the main house. I vaulted over a stack of crates, my knee scraping painfully, and burst through a side window, showering glass onto the overgrown shrubbery outside. A siren began to wail in the distance, a rising shriek that confirmed my worst fears. The local enforcement was likely already compromised, and Thorne was calling in his own security. I ran, not looking back, the cool night air a shock against my flushed skin. Each stride was a gamble, each shadow a potential threat. I reached it, fumbling with the keys, the engine roaring to life on the second try. The estate gates were already closing, massive wrought iron jaws slowly grinding shut. I floored the accelerator, the tires spitting gravel, and burst through the gap just as they met with a resounding clang. The drive was a haze of adrenaline and calculated risk. I knew a place, a secure, off-grid location I sometimes used for sensitive analyses, a relic from an earlier, more paranoid phase of my career. It was a private, rented space, unassuming from the outside, but shielded and self-contained within. Inside, it was a different world. The room was a symphony of low-frequency hums and soft, persistent light. This was my sanctuary, my fortress of solitude, where logic superseded emotion. I set up my mobile workstation on a folding table, the familiar click of my forensic toolkit a comfort. My hands, still trembling slightly, moved with practiced precision. The micro camera, the UV light, the magnifiers, the specialized software for image analysis. I downloaded the photographic evidence from the micro SD card I'd snatched from the vault. High-resolution images of Thorne's forgery workshop, the artifacts, the unique tools, the Keeper's symbol etched into ancient relics. I cross-referenced them with the photos I'd taken at Finch's estate, the scene of the fall, the victim's remains, the minute, anachronistic details I'd meticulously documented. The screen glowed, illuminating my face with its cool blue light. I zoomed in on a faint, almost invisible residue on Finch's shoe, a fine, metallic dust. Then, I pulled up an image from Thorne's workshop. The workbench, littered with various implements, and a small, almost microscopic pile of the exact same metallic dust near a specialized grinding wheel. I overlaid the images, aligning them, the match undeniable. Next, I focused on the fibers. It was a synthetic blend, unusual, and I'd logged its unique spectral signature. I pulled up another image, this one from the floor of Thorne's vault, a zoomed-in shot of a discarded cleaning cloth. There, interwoven into the cloth, were identical fibers. Not just similar, but identical. The unique weave, the specific synthetic composition. It screamed direct contact. Thorne hadn't simply pushed Finch. He had orchestrated a meticulous, brutal deception. The anachronistic details on Finch's person weren't just decorative. They were a cruel signature, a symbolic defilement. The unique residue, the fibers, the subtle marks on the ancient artifacts in Thorne's possession. They all pointed to a single damning truth. Thorne hadn't just murdered Finch. He had used his own illicit trade to frame the death as an accident, to bury the truth under a mountain of carefully crafted lies. I worked methodically, building my presentation, each slide a hammer blow against Thorne's carefully constructed facade. Photos, spectral analyses, comparative microscopy, timelines. I crafted a narrative that was unassailable, a forensic tapestry woven from irrefutable evidence. This wasn't just circumstantial. It was a direct, undeniable link. My life was now squarely in the crosshairs. Presenting this evidence to a potentially compromised police force was a gamble, a desperate throw of the dice. But the alternative, letting Thorne and the Keepers continue their deadly work, was unthinkable. I saved the final file, encrypted and triple-backed up. The blinking servers reflected in my determined eyes. The fight had just begun. My lungs burned, each gasp tearing at my throat. I could hear the distant, measured cadence of approaching footsteps, too heavy for Thorne, too precise for a panicked guard. The security chief. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who enjoyed the hunt. My mind raced, not with panic, but with calculations. The estate's schematics, memorized during long nights of research, played out in my head. I needed to get to the core, the nexus of their operation. The anachronistic residue on Dr. Finch's remains, the faint traces of a specific mineral found only in a forgotten historical mining site Thorne owned, was the physical link. The coded message Dr. Finch had hidden, referencing the Keepers and specific auction dates, was the motive. But the real leverage, the undeniable proof, lay in the digital realm. I ducked into a narrow maintenance shaft, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of ozone. The jammer's faint hum was a counterpoint to the thudding of my own pulse against my eardrums. I knew the security chief would sweep the corridors, relying on the system to pinpoint my location once the jammer faltered. My only chance was to move counterintuitively, deeper into the estate's technological heart. Through the shaft, the hum grew louder, a chorus of low-frequency vibrations. I emerged, not into another corridor, but a utilitarian access tunnel, brightly lit by strips of LED. The sudden light was jarring after the gloom. My eyes adjusted, scanning for threats. Nothing. Yet. I pushed forward, the sound intensifying, guiding me like a beacon. Then, I was there. The tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous space. This wasn't just a server farm. It was a fortress of digital assets. The very pulse of Thorne's illicit empire. My eyes darted across the screens embedded into control panels, displaying graphs and cryptic lines of code. This was where the value of ancient history was transmuted into untraceable wealth. I knew Thorne used cryptocurrency for his transactions, moving stolen artifacts across borders with phantom ledgers. My target was the central console, a larger, more intricate setup at the far end of the aisle. I moved quickly, my footsteps muffled by the static hum. The jammer was weakening. I could feel it. Any moment, a digital alarm would shriek. I reached the main console, a behemoth of screens. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a sequence of commands I'd prepared, based on intelligence from Dr. Finch's cryptic notes. The interface glowed, a labyrinth of directories. I had to be fast, precise. A low growl echoed from the entrance of the aisle. "You really shouldn't have come this far, Seth." I froze, my fingers hovering over the enter key. Thorne, his voice, usually smooth and cultured, was laced with an icy menace. I turned slowly, my eyes meeting his. He stood framed by the tunnel entrance, flanked by 2 security personnel, their expressions grim. The security chief was not among them, meaning he was still sweeping the outer perimeter. A small victory, but a fleeting one. "It's over, Thorne," I stated, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I have the evidence. The mineral traces on Dr. Finch, the coded messages, your financial ledgers linked to the ancient mining site. It all points to you and the Keepers." Thorne laughed, a dry, humorless sound that reverberated off the metal racks. "Evidence? You have assumptions, a few coincidences, and soon you'll have nothing." He gestured to one of his guards. "Contain him. Gently, for now. I want to know how he got past the perimeter." "You won't find it," I said, my gaze sweeping the console. I had seconds. My plan wasn't just to find the evidence, but to broadcast it. I'd set up a remote trigger, a dead man switch. If I couldn't send it, it would send itself. But I wanted the satisfaction of doing it myself. As the guards advanced, I saw it. A hidden directory, labeled only with an arcane symbol I recognized from Dr. Finch's research on the Keeper's insignia. It was a digital lockbox. My fingers darted to the key, a complex string of characters I'd deduced from the anachronistic details. I pressed Enter. The screen flickered, then displayed a torrent of information. Detailed manifests of stolen artifacts, transaction logs, dates, coordinates, and names of influential figures, collectors, and even some public officials. A global network, hidden in plain sight. I had a split second. My thumb slammed down on the upload command, my other hand already pulling a small, discreet device from my pocket. It was a pre-programmed satellite burst transmitter designed for extreme conditions. "It's out," I gasped, the words barely audible above the sudden blare of an alarm that ripped through the data center. A red light flashed above the console. To every authority I could reach. "The world knows now, Thorn. Your legacy is ashes." Thorn's face was a mask of pure fury. He grabbed a heavy metal bar from a nearby rack, his eyes burning with murderous intent. The guards hesitated, caught between their orders to contain and Thorn's sudden, violent shift. I dodged the first guard, slipping past him just as Thorn swung the bar. It whistled past my ear, embedding itself with a sickening thud into the console, showering sparks. He'd destroyed the immediate display, but it was too late. The data was gone, transmitted into the digital ether. "You fool!" Thorn shrieked, advancing. "You've ruined everything." I didn't respond. I knew I had ignited a firestorm. Now I just had to survive the inferno. I scanned the vast data center, the rows of servers, the narrow aisles. My forensic eye, accustomed to dissecting complex scenes, immediately identified my next move. The emergency exit far across the room was my only chance. But between me and it stood Thorn, a man unhinged, and his two remaining enforcers. The fight for Dr. Finch's justice had just become a fight for my own life. The emergency exit, far across the room, beckoned like a distant beacon in a storm. My gaze snapped from the exit back to the approaching enforcer, his silhouette growing larger against the pulsing blue and green lights of the servers. He wasn't moving with the frantic energy of a cornered animal, but with a predatory calm, a deliberate stride that suggested absolute certainty in his outcome. He knew I had nowhere to go, or so he thought. My mind, a crucible of analytical thought even under duress, raced through possibilities. Confrontation was suicide. Evasion, my only option. I noted the gap between the server racks, the dense cabling underfoot, the cold air humming with the work of countless processors. But I was a man of patterns, of disruptions in established order. I didn't run towards the exit. Instead, I veered sharply, diving between two towering racks, the metal cold against my shoulder as I squeezed through. The enforcer, momentarily thrown by my unexpected move, barked a frustrated command. I heard his heavy boots thudding behind me, closer now. He was faster than I anticipated. My heart, a steady drum through countless archaeological digs and forensic examinations, now hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from the brutal immediacy of survival. I burst out into a wider service corridor, the air here slightly warmer, less sterile. The emergency exit was to my left, perhaps 20 meters away. I pushed, my lungs burning, the metallic tang of exertion coating my tongue. A shout echoed behind me. Then a sudden cacophony of sirens ripped through the quiet hum of the building. Red and blue lights flashed through the corridor's glass panels, painting the walls in urgent, shifting hues. A team of tactical officers, their presence a direct result of the evidence I'd covertly transmitted, swarmed through the main entrance, weapons raised. The enforcer, caught between me and the unexpected arrival, froze. He turned, A futile attempt to engage, but he was overwhelmed in seconds, brought down by a precise, practiced maneuver. I leaned against the cool metal of the emergency door, my chest heaving, the adrenaline slowly receding, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. The inferno, it seemed, had been doused. The days that followed were a blur of debriefings, official statements, and the systematic dismantling of Thorne's illicit enterprise. My detailed forensic reports, coupled with the digital evidence I'd secured, proved irrefutable. The network of the Keepers, a clandestine society masquerading as historical preservationists, their true aim, the monopolization and manipulation of ancient knowledge for profit and power, was exposed. The prominent historian's death, once dismissed as a tragic accident, was now definitively reclassified as murder, a direct consequence of his discovery of their operations. The recovered artifacts, priceless relics of human history, were paraded before the international press. Fragments of forgotten civilizations, once destined for the black market or hidden in private collections, were meticulously cataloged and prepared for repatriation. The sheer volume of the recovered items, the breadth of their origins, spoke to the scale of Thorne's ambition and the depth of the Keeper's reach. I watched the news reports from the quiet solitude of my apartment, a mug of lukewarm tea clutched in my hand. Each artifact displayed on screen was a victory, a testament to the quiet power of science to uncover truth. Yet the emotional and psychological toll was immense. Sleep became a luxury, fragmented by vivid dreams of dusty crypts and blinking server lights. I walked through a local park one crisp morning, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot, the sunlight filtering through the bare branches. A child laughed nearby, a sound of unburdened joy. It was a stark contrast to the grim realities I had unearthed. My pursuit of justice, driven by the meticulous application of forensic science, had brought down an empire. But at what cost to my own peace? The truth, I reflected, was not always a gentle unveiling. Sometimes it was a brutal excavation, tearing away layers of deceit and exposing raw, ugly realities. My work had always been about giving voice to the voiceless, bringing light to the forgotten. This case, however, had twisted that purpose into a dangerous personal quest. I had crossed a line, stepping from academic pursuit into the perilous world of active investigation, a world where the stakes were not just reputation, but life itself. A call came a few days later. It was from a contact within an international investigative body, a quiet voice on the other end, offering not congratulations, but a proposition. They had followed my work, my unconventional methods, my unwavering commitment to empirical evidence. They spoke of other legacy keepers, of ancient secrets still guarded, of truths buried deeper than any archaeological site. They needed someone who could see beyond the obvious, someone who understood the language of bones and dust, and the silent narratives they held. I listened, my gaze drifting to the framed photograph on my desk. A grainy image of a partially excavated tomb, a relic of a past life. But the thought of turning away, of retreating to the safe confines of academia, felt like a betrayal of the truth I had fought so hard to uncover. The relentless pursuit of justice, I realized, was not a destination, but a path. A winding, perilous path, perhaps, but one I was uniquely equipped to traverse. My forensic eye, honed by years of dissecting the past, was now focused on the future. I took a deep breath, the crisp air filling my lungs. The inferno might have been doused, but new fires, I suspected, were waiting to be ignited. And I, Seth, the forensic anthropologist, was ready to face them.